Namaskar viewers, hello and welcome to Sansad TV. I am Teena Jha, you are watching Perspective. The Prime Minister of New Zealand, Christopher Luxon, is on a 5-day official visit to India. On Monday, he met Prime Minister Narendra Modi and held extensive discussions with him on ways to further strengthen the long-standing, warm and friendly ties between both the countries. Exchanging views on regional and global developments of mutual interest, the Prime Ministers agreed to strengthen multilateral cooperation. Both leaders also noted that as maritime nations, India and New Zealand have a strong and common interest in an open, inclusive, stable and prosperous Indo-Pacific, where the rules-based international order is upheld. The Prime Ministers welcomed the launch of FTA negotiations for a balanced, ambitious, comprehensive and mutually beneficial trade agreement to achieve deeper economic integration. FTA talks between the two countries had started in April 2010, but stalled after 10 rounds of negotiations due to disagreements over market access and trade priorities. Now, the relaunch of negotiations comes in the backdrop of geopolitical tensions and the threat of tariff war unleashed by the Trump administration. So, how will both sides move forward with the talks now? What are some of the other key outcomes following the productive talks between Prime Minister Modi and his New Zealand counterpart, Prime Minister Christopher Luxon? We'll talk about all this and much more in this edition of Perspective. It gives me immense pleasure to welcome two distinguished guests on this edition of Perspective. With me in the studio is Professor Rajaram Panda, former Senior Fellow at the Nehru Memorial Museum and Library, New Delhi. Professor, thank you for your time. Welcome to Sansad TV. Joining us virtually is Ambassador Sanjeev Kohli, former High Commissioner of India to New Zealand. Ambassador, thank you for your time. Welcome to the program as well. But before we proceed, we'll talk about some of the key announcements that have been made and which found a way in the list of outcomes from the official visit of the Prime Minister of New Zealand to India and also his subsequent meeting with Prime Minister Modi. So, the launch of negotiations between India and New Zealand on a free trade agreement, the FTA, the launch of negotiations between India and New Zealand on an arrangement facilitating the mobility of professionals and skilled workers, New Zealand joining the Indo-Pacific Oceans Initiative, the IPOI, and New Zealand becoming a member of the Coalition for Disaster Resilient Infrastructure, which is the CDRI. Besides, a memorandum of understanding on defence cooperation has also been signed between the Ministry of Defence of India and the New Zealand Ministry of Defence. A memorandum of cooperation on horticulture between the Ministry of Agriculture and Farmers Welfare of India and the Ministry for Primary Industries of New Zealand, and a memorandum of cooperation in sports between the Ministry of Youth Affairs and Sports of the Government of India and the Sport New Zealand of the Government of New Zealand. So, we'll discuss each of these agreements and the key announcements that have been made in greater detail with the two distinguished guests we have with us on the program. But to begin with, Professor, give us an overview of the significance of this visit, considering that it's the first official one for the Prime Minister of New Zealand, and he is being accompanied by a high-level delegation which comprises of not just ministers but officials, representatives of businesses, also community, diaspora and cultural groups. So, in the wake of all of that and the announcements that I just read out, how significant is it in writing a new chapter in India-New Zealand relations?
Yes, it is indeed a very good new beginning, because historically we have got very good relations, but as we will appreciate, every country has its own national interest, and the core of the talk that actually is in focus basically concentrates on the economic areas, right, and on which things are not very encouraging at the moment, because as you rightly mentioned, about a decade and a half ago, this negotiation on the FTA, the free trade agreement, commenced. But then there are issues. You see, let me give you some some information about my own personal experience. New Zealand actually is an island country, and it very jealously protects its agricultural products, yes, and the dairy products, because I do remember, even when you reach the airport there will be on display multiple level of scanning, your entire body will be scanned. Even one apple, even if suppose you by mistake you carry one apple or even a banana, and don't disclose this, you will be heavily penalized, because the objective is to protect the industry, because any infection. So that is one area. Now on the question of market access, if we compare both the countries, the tariff rates, I think New Zealand is in a stronger position to bargain, and the challenge actually lies on India. If you see the comparison of the tariff rates, New Zealand imposes less than 3% of the imports from India, but India imposes close to about 18%. So unless we are flexible, and also if you see the bilateral total bilateral trade between the two countries, it actually sounds to be very minuscule. It is less than 1 billion, which is nothing actually in the contemporary present world. But that is one aspect. The second aspect is we are living in a world which is interconnected, and both economy, trade, investment, all these are integral part of any two countries economic relations. We need to identify what are our strengths. For example, in the IT sector, for example, service sector, the second one, in the educational sector, these are all our strengths, which actually we can leverage. And New Zealand is actually a very lovely, beautiful country. Even the other day I was watching YouTube channel, and our cricket former captain Mahendra Singh Dhoni, he was asked, which is the country which you would like to prefer to go multiple times? He said New Zealand. So that is why actually that is what we should leverage, because in terms of tourism, I think from the New Zealand point of view, this is their maybe strong card they can play.
Right.
Similarly, in the service sector, tourism, for example, it is indeed a very, very safe country. So we the challenge before the policy makers, the negotiators from our side, is to identify the areas where our strength lies and how we can sell our ideas to the New Zealanders. And from their point of view, they will certainly need reciprocal treatment from the Indian side.
Absolutely. How we move forward is something that we will discuss in the course of the program. Ambassador, coming to you for your thoughts on the significance of this visit. There are disagreements, there have been disagreements on the FTA. We will also talk about those disagreements that prevailed, but how we are going to now find a common ground and move forward is something that you can answer in the later half. But to begin with, your assessment of the significance that this visit holds, from the point of view that this is the first by Prime Minister Christopher Luxon in his current capacity. The second aspect again, that the fact that he is being accompanied by a high-level delegation, something that Prime Minister Modi also referred to in the joint statement. And thirdly, that he is the chief guest at the Raisina Dialogue. It's an annual geopolitical conference. We see the big leaders, big global leaders and members of the think tank converging and discussing the geopolitical problems and the challenges. But at the same time, the fact that the Prime Minister of New Zealand is the chief guest, perhaps the first non-European leader to be invited as the chief guest. So how much significance in totality does this visit hold, according to you?
Well, let me begin by saying that both India and New Zealand share a very rich history of friendship. And when such long-standing friends visit you at the highest level, at the level of the Prime Minister, it's always a good thing for the relationship. Right. Professor Panda touched about the economic part of it, but let me also say that our people-to-people contacts go back to history. Auckland is the biggest city in New Zealand, and the Auckland Indian Association was set up in 1920. So, people-to-people contacts have been a great source of strength to the relationship. I mean, the people of the Indian diaspora has been acting as a living bridge, as they say, between the two countries. When I left New Zealand as the High Commissioner in 2019, the diaspora strength was about 175,000. Now it's crossed 300,000, and we are the largest ethnic community in New Zealand. When I was there, it was the Chinese people of Chinese origin, but now people of Indian origin constitute the largest overseas community, and Hindi is the third most widely spoken language. So that shows the inherent strength of the relationship. That shows the strong foundations on which our relationship rests. And the fact that the Prime Minister, as you rightly said, has come is the largest ever Prime Minister delegation that the New Zealand Prime Minister has taken abroad. Right. That again shows the priority they attach to, kind of giving a new momentum and new thrust to the relationship. That the fact the composition of delegation, business people, the community, as I said, the community there has been a huge pillar of strength to the relationship. We have had members of Parliament of Indian origin, we had ministers of Indian origin. So and when the visit takes place at that level, it gives an opportunity for the review of the entire spectrum of the relationship at the highest level. It gives an opportunity to look at areas where we need to refocus and also to look at new areas of cooperation. So it's a very significant visit. And there has been a kind of there was a bit of stagnation first because of COVID, and then New Zealand's own preoccupation. So Prime Minister Luxon, who took over not many years back, has realized that relationship with India, especially the field of trade and investment, is something which New Zealand should focus on, and his visit underlines that focus.
Okay, on the aspect of economic relationship, Ambassador, the fact that both sides have now welcomed the relaunch of the FTA talks. We remember the talks were stalled because of certain differences, which Professor Panda also spoke about. In fact, Commerce Minister Piyush Goyal has this time called it a significant milestone in our partnership. He goes on to say that it reflects our shared vision to deepen trade ties and also expand economic opportunities. How crucial is this announcement of, relaunching the FTA talks after a hiatus of 10 years in terms of strengthening the economic relationship that both countries share, and also the fact that he spoke about opening newer avenues. So what kind of new avenues will the renewed negotiations now open up for the businesses, also for the consumers on both sides?
We have to start by looking at the fact that free trade negotiations are always a very complex and time-consuming process. And wherever we've concluded, it takes a lot of time. And since the focus is on having, a free trade arrangement which is balanced, which has mutual benefit, has optimum outcome, so that makes it very complex. And New Zealand realizes that. As you rightly said, the free trade negotiations were happening when I was the High Commissioner there. And so it remains a work in progress. And again, I think New Zealand was probably looking for the best possible arrangement. And as I say, sometimes when you search for the best, you lose sight of the good. So I think New Zealand has now realized, that they should start with something which probably works well for both sides, and that build incrementally. Our strength is in services, so we've been looking at things like mobility of Indian skilled workforce to New Zealand. And New Zealand, as Professor Panda said, their strength is agriculture, dairy, which, again, are sensitive in terms of our own agriculture and farming community. But I think now that realization has happened, so I'm sure that, there would be a fresh kind of look at what we are looking to achieve at, with both sides making the necessary concessions. We could start with something where, some of the things that the tariff concessions are front-loaded, some of things can happen later. And I think New Zealand has also realized that, while the free trade area remains a work in progress, there are other ways to increase your trade investment ties by building, more linkages between the business communities. Business people should meet more often. And again, in that context, connectivity, there's been this demand both by the Indian diaspora and the business communities. There should be a direct flight between the two countries, so they can look at that. More business delegations coming in, which is happening. And so all this, provides a kind of good ground for the trade and investment ties to grow further. And again, the diaspora could be a bridge for the business relationship. And I've seen lots of people from the Indian community getting active in trying to, network New Zealand businesses with the Indian business. So I think with that also, with the current chaos around tariffs and all that, I think both countries realize it's good for both countries that they have some kind of mechanism in place which allows them a bit of stability in terms of tariff, and both sides can work on something which is to mutual benefit rather than looking for something which is ideal. I mean, it's very difficult to get an ideal arrangement in a free trade mechanism.
Okay. Professor, how do you look at now both sides finding a common ground? Because the differences persist. There were disagreements on two key areas back in 2015 when the talks were stalled. One was about market access, the other was about the trade priorities. Those differences will still persist when the negotiations start. Now, as we look forward for resumption in trade talks, will the tariffs also, something that you mentioned, there is a stark difference in the tariff rates that both countries have. Will that also make things difficult? But at the same time, what is the roadmap that both sides will have to work on to find a common ground?
Diplomacy.
Okay.
See, if I take a wider and larger perspective, I think let us not overlook the impact on the thinking on the minds of the Indian leaders and as well as also New Zealand leaders on as a kind of after effect of what Trump has been doing in America. So I think diplomacy is the key, and on which we need to find out a middle path where we can arrive at a kind of win-win situation. Tariff actually is not something very peculiar to the negotiation between India and New Zealand alone. I can give an example about the kind of negotiation we had with Japan, for example. We were very keen to export Alfonso mango, and the Japanese are very much strict because they were very adamant, and they preferred to import from Philippines, for example. That time I do remember, I think it was the Kamarnath was, Kamarnath I think was the minister who was there, and then he negotiated very strongly. You see, and he succeeded in making the Japanese agree to be flexible, though the rates they did maintain quantitative restrictions on the imports. So this is just an example which can be also applied to the New Zealand side. Yes. So here diplomacy is very key, and this is a globalized world. Economically we are all interconnected. So no country will remain or even function ideally in a very isolationistic environment. So this is a challenge for the political leaders, and I think as I said, and I would like to repeat again, we need to identify the areas and sectors which are more easier for both of us to carry on. For example, service sector, in the education sector, in the field of education, for example. I think it is a very apart from New Zealand, even Australia, and I think India's global profile has reached to such an extent now in the current, during this in Prime Minister Modi's 2 terms of Prime Ministership, and now we are in the 3rd term. I think that has created a new impetus in the world, not only in New Zealand, the entire world. We have, I would say, we have arrived at the world stage. That is, the world is recognizing. So here, the dynamism of Prime Minister Modi, his negotiating style, and we have a very strong leader, a team of leaders. I think we should continue. Perseverance is the key, and diplomacy has to be active, and I think the end result will be kind of, we'll find very soon in a very win-win situation.
Okay, let me take that question to Ambassador, because when diplomacy will be the key, Ambassador, we've seen Indian diplomats doing miracles, and especially at a time when the world is, deeply polarized, the geopolitical tensions are at an all-time high. The G20 declaration, which was adopted because the Indian diplomats made it happen, is something which is an example for all of us to cite. In situations where a breakthrough is required, what will India do? Also keeping in mind the fact that significant reductions in tariff will make the FTA less attractive for India. So in that scenario, what is the best way forward?
I think successful negotiations, require give and take. It's never a zero-sum game.
Right.
And both sides, when they realize that, in the totality of the relationship, trade and investment ties have to gain momentum. So I'm sure that both sides would make the necessary concessions. And, we were talking of a fresh approach to this. Prime Minister Luxon is not a traditional politician. He comes from a business background. He was the CEO of Air New Zealand. So I'm sure he'll bring a fresh focus, a fresh kind of a look to the negotiations. And as I said, New Zealand is now ready to kind of, work on incremental gains. They are not looking for something, which should be perfect to begin with.
Right.
They would start with something where, it suits both sides in terms of their mutual interests, and then you can make incremental gains. And at the same time, as I said, there are other ways of also, increasing these ties through building better relationships between the businesses of both sides. So I think both sides are very bullish on this. Both sides have seen the past, what has happened in the earlier negotiations. So everyone is looking at it with a new and positive outlook. So I'm very hopeful that, given the friendship that we have and also the realization that, as friends, we really need to, sometimes we need to walk more than half the distance. So India would be accommodative and New Zealand would take a more pragmatic approach, a more practical approach. And that's how, things could happen.
Okay, we'll also talk about the other avenues and other areas of potential which in which the agreements have been signed. But very quickly, I'll take one last question on the FTA, Professor, from you. Some experts have also suggested that, FTA, unlike FTA is not something that looks like a viable option for India. Instead, they suggest that a comprehensive economic partnership could perhaps be a more viable and a more profitable thing for India. Do you think that is something which could pave way for a broader economic cooperation between India and New Zealand? Because unlike the FTA, the CEP will be more accommodative, and therein India wouldn't be expected to come down and reduce these tariffs significantly?
Definitely, and also I think we need to focus on both the fronts. And let me give an example. I think in Auckland now we are going to. I have a friend now who has gone there in last December as a Consul General, Dr. Madan Mon Sethi. Earlier he was in Ho Chi Minh City in Vietnam. And Ho Chi Minh City is a commercial center, commercial capital of Vietnam. And now he has been entrusted to focus on that area in Auckland. So this is a kind of indication how we are planning to engage economically with with New Zealand. So I think, as I said, and I repeat again, it is you cannot have shortcut in any kind of this kind of negotiation. There has to be a consistent, persistent effort, and as the ambassador Kohli said, there has to be give and take. It can't be kind of one-way traffic. No country will agree or even I would say surrender to the demand of the other economic partner.
Absolutely.
So unless there is some kind of adjustment, mutual adjustment, compromises, give and take approach, weigh the cost benefit analysis of on each issues. I think if they approach, both the sides approach that kind of approach, probably I think we can come out with some tangible outcome.
Right.
Which will be mutually beneficial.
Let's see how both sides move forward with the FTA talks. But another key area which has been prioritized, Ambassador, by both sides, and which has found mention in the joint cooperation, in the joint statement, is the area of defence and maritime cooperation. An MOU has also been signed in the area of defence cooperation between both sides. Traditionally, we are seeing that between India and New Zealand, defence cooperation has largely been limited and involved in activities like port visits by the naval vessels, visits by the military commanders, military personnel from both countries serving in the United Nations peacekeeping missions. But there is need to now take this to another level. How do you think both sides or how can we explore the potential of perhaps exploring and taking to greater heights the defense cooperation, the maritime cooperation between India and New Zealand?
I think both India and New Zealand are big stakeholders in the Indo-Pacific, and as you said, there have been port visits, or there have been visits by chiefs of the forces, but they have not been very frequent, they have not been very regular. So I think what we are looking at now is to have a more structured kind of interaction where such contacts, such exchanges are more frequent. There's more sharing of perspectives, there's more sharing of information, and at necessary platforms, both countries they kind of support those initiatives which are for mutual benefit. So it's a kind of sustained engagement, and once we have this MOU in place, that will provide a structured mechanism for these things to happen more frequently. And I'm sure this would emerge as an important area for cooperation, and I really welcome this MOU which has been signed on defense cooperation.
Professor, one last question in the area of defense and maritime cooperation. Do you see potential in both countries also collaborating more, working together in the South Pacific? New Zealand is a key stakeholder, but in recent years, we're also seeing India playing an active role in terms of providing aid to these countries also.
I will take a larger perspective. You see, apart from New Zealand, let us not also overlook our engagement with Australia. Yes. Because both are the Oceania countries. And also please also do remember this is India's the maritime cooperation from that point of view, it is nothing new. Actually, even 2010, I will tell you, we had our former naval chief Suresh Mehta. He was a High Commissioner. So sending a naval chief, former naval chief to New Zealand as High Commissioner, what is the significance of that? The kind of obviously India had some long-term view of engaging New Zealand and Australia in the maritime domain, and in the last 15 years, China's emergence as a kind of potential threat also propels many countries in the Indo-Pacific to discuss, deal, engage in the maritime field. And maritime security actually has emerged as a very, very significant issue, because unless you secure the sea, your trade, commerce and everything will be affected. So that is a very, very, and China is a potential disruptor. Let us not overlook that.
Absolutely.
So all these things, so these geopolitical factors shaping diplomatic initiative also is a very important dimension in the international politics, and India, Australia, India, New Zealand relations in the oceanic, not only India and Australia and New Zealand, even the South Pacific island nations, we are also engaging. So the entire region, is very, very important for India's foreign policy point of view. So I think that way the New Zealand Prime Minister's visit to India is a very, very significant, and I would say is a milestone development. And I think let us take a very positive view for the future, and things will be, I think we can
absolutely
see,
so things look brighter for a relationship between India and New Zealand. We've traditionally enjoyed friendly and warm relations, but this visit of the visit of the Prime Minister of New Zealand to India, the first in his current capacity, is definitely a key milestone, as both our guests pointed out, in terms of enhancing the scope and scale of the cooperation that we've had, also in terms of exploring newer avenues of cooperation that we can build in the times to come. So time allows me to take up only that much on this edition of Perspective. I would like to thank both my guests once again for joining us on the program, sharing your thoughts with us and our viewers. And to you viewers, thank you very much for your time as well. It's a wrap on this edition of Perspective.